Hello. I had plans to do a proper video this week, but it's Christmas and I don't have time because nobody has time because it's Christmas. And there's so much to do, even when you're having a lazy lockdown Christmas and not having hordes of guests over like you normally do. But I wanted to make a little video instead, just a quick one, on having some confidence in yourself. Because I hear a lot of people say they've done some freehand embroidery and then they say they used a pattern or they've drawn it on the cloth. And to me, if you're going to draw something freehand or you're going to stitch something freehand, it's like when you draw freehand, you don't use a template and you don't draw it on the cloth. And people say, well, I couldn't do that, I'd go wonky. Well, if you can draw something without having to use, trace it or whatever, then you can stitch it as well. And you should just try. You should just have the faith in yourself to just doodle on a piece of cloth. I mean, we've all got scraps of cloth around that, aren't particularly great and we could play with them. And I think people become so hidebound to using patterns and always doing what it says in the book and doing what you're told and following the instructions that it can kind of suck all the creativity out of things. And when I say I've stitched something freehand, I mean I haven't drawn it on the cloth at all. And I think that very often that's a really easy way to do things. And sometimes it's the best way to do things. Because sometimes you might not want to draw on the cloth because you're using a very dark cloth, and if you draw on it, you won't be able to see it, or because you want to do a very fine line and it will show beneath your stitching. And there are lots of things that you can do without having to draw a proper drawing on the cloth. And a great way to sort of take that leap and have a go is just with flowers and leaves. Because, when we're kids, we all draw flowers. And we can all draw a flower now, even if it doesn't look like a botanical drawing, if it doesn't look like, the Royal Horticultural Society would give it a Latin name. And if you can doodle a flower with a few petals around it, then you can doodle a flower in stitch. In this case, you can doodle a holly leaf. And I'm absolutely convinced that a lot of historical embroidery was done without marking on the cloth at all, especially a lot of the sort of curlier versions of blackwork, which is basically what I'm doing with this holly leaf, although I'm using green. I'm just using stem stitch, by the way. This is just some scraps of silk I had left from doing the Little Bishop project. And the thing about a holly leaf is they're never perfect anyway, so why does the holly leaf that you sew have to be perfect? I've actually done the spines for 2 holly leaves. I probably should have done 4, but I can add another one. Flowers aren't perfect, so why do the ones that you have to sew have to be perfect? You can always fudge the leaves a little bit. You can add an extra leaf to something and they look perfectly all right. I'm working without a frame because I find that easier for stem stitch for some reason. I'm absolutely rubbish at stem stitch on a frame. I always catch my thread at the back and saw through it, and it ends up being a disaster. I should probably use shorter bits of threads, but I never learn. You can see that while I'm talking to you, I've done half a holly leaf, and it's a perfectly adequate holly leaf. If I wanted to fill it with satin stitch, then maybe I could. I'm just going to take a few stitches through the back here to anchor it off. No idea where all the embroidery stitches are. I think my cat's eaten them all again. I'll find 6 pairs down the back of the sofa in New Year. There we go. Oh, I've lost my needle. So I think everybody should try at least once to just sew something without drawing it on the canvas. Because if you go on embroidery forums, people are constantly complaining about, oh, I use this Frixion pen, or I use this heat erase pen and it won't go away, or when I ironed the fabric, the pattern came back and you can see it. And 9 times out of 10, the patterns they're complaining about that they've drawn on the fabric are so simple that you could have just stitched it. And if you think about something like a flower, the way you draw a flower is you do the centre of the flower first, the little dot in the middle, and you can sew a little dot. And then you do the petals around the outside. Well, they're just loops. You can sew a loop. Everyone can sew a loop. And then you do maybe a stem or a few leaves. Well, the stem's just a line, and it doesn't have to be a straight one. A leaf is just a vaguely oval, heart-shaped, 3-lobe, wobbly, spiky green bit. I mean, leaves can be pretty much any shape. And very often you can see that what I'm doing here is I'm actually sewing round the pad of my thumb, and that gives you a lovely, smooth, rounded shape that's absolutely fine. I mean, I'll admit I'm a very quick stitcher, and I've been stitching since I was about 5, but until you take that first leap and you have some faith in yourself, you'll never know whether or not you can do it. And you can even do some very straight geometric lines without a template. Because if you're working on a nice, even fabric, you can just use the grain of the fabric to fill it in. So I've got one holly leaf. I'm just going to stitch over the back a little bit there to take my thread back. And then I'm going to come out here, because I think that's where these leaves overlap. And it's just a linear stitch. If you can draw a line, you can stitch a line. Same with lettering. Why do you need to write lettering? You can write, you can stitch, therefore you can stitch letters. Unless you're doing incredibly ornate calligraphic ones. Sometimes it's worth trying doing it this way, because it's just a whole lot less hassle, especially if you want it done quickly. If you think of all the time you spend faffing around, drawing things. I mean, when I do my big Luttrell Salter hangings, it takes me days to draw those, because I've got to get all the little creatures talking to each other. And yes, I wouldn't dream of doing one of those freehand, but there's something quite liberating about knowing that you could if you wanted to, which is why I think everybody should try it. You're all just looking at this video and thinking that woman's crazy anyway. She's mad, she talks to a cat. She probably talks to the pot plants if the cat's not there. I'll have you know my cat gives better conversation than most men. He's quite intelligent, grumpy bugger, but I've got a little bit wobbly on there. That's not the end of the world. Not everything you stitch has to be perfect. Especially not at Christmas. And if you've ever noticed, holly's quite often a little bit wibbly wobbly anyway. I've got a knot now. You watch, I'll not be able to get a knot off. There. Always happens to me when I'm teaching. Somebody gets a knot, I can never undo it for them. Useless with knots. I think that's perfectly adequate holly leaf. It's looking all right, that. It's just a case of just doing a series of pointy bits, really. Flowers are the same. There are some lovely Tudor blackwork patterns that I swear are easier to do without drawing anything on the canvas. And half of the little squirrels and things on shirts just look like somebody doodled them anyway. They're so out of proportion. They're almost as bad as the medieval horses that look like somebody bought their horse from IKEA and didn't read the instructions when they were assembling it. So having a bit of wobble on things, especially if you're doing historical embroidery, just adds charm and authenticity to things, I think. I'm having a right ramble here. You've probably given up now. You've probably just thought, oh, I'm going for a sherry. I'll have a couple of margaritas. Mad cow never shuts up. But I'm nearly finished my holly leaf, bear with me. See, my camera's saying 12 minutes there. 12 minutes for 2 holly leaves isn't bad. Imagine if I'd sat there and drawn them out. I'm actually worse at drawing holly leaves than I am at sewing them. You can even do a simple bird. I mean, you think how simple a cartoon bird can be. Because when I did, if you can see the Christmas bishop, I just did that little bird as a little doodle. I didn't draw him. Because he's only 3 lines and an eye. Not difficult. Nearly finished. And then, of course, when I'm finished, the only thing it needs to finish it is a couple of little red berries. I'm not going to worry about the back. If it's a bit tatty, if it's a bit messy, I don't mind. Oops. I say oops a lot. It worries Gareth. He doesn't like it when he hears me say oops. It usually means I've dropped something. I'm very clumsy. So 2 holly leaves, and then I think all it needs is obviously some berries. Although I think we're having another one of those winters where the holly doesn't have any berries. And actually, the hardest bit to do without marking it is a circle. But the trick is to try and keep them small and not obsess about them being all that circular. So mine's come out a bit square there. But the other way to do it is to work around, not quite do it in satin stitch, but to give it some volume by working it round and round and round. It takes a bit longer. And crossing over in the middle every time. So I just need to move it. Oops, she said, completely mucking it up. Just keep adding extra stitches till it's round, to be honest. Circles are always hard. Came out all right in the end. Just needs another one. I think it needs the other one over those green bits, doesn't it? I'm working on linen, I'm not used to it. I nearly always work on wool these days, it's much better. Linen seems to resist the needle a lot more. I always find I can get better stitch placement on linen. There we go. I'm going to work those across a bit to get it nice and round. Sort of looks tartan with the green showing through. It's quite cool. There we go. So you see, if you can draw a simple holly leaf with a felt tip pen, you can draw a simple holly leaf with a needle. And you don't need it to be marked out and fancy, because you've just seen me do it. If you can draw it, you can do it.